Welcome to this quiet journey through Fallout 4. Tonight we'll drift through the overlooked corners, hidden designs, and obscure details that shaped the wasteland. From forgotten developer secrets to background lore written deep into the environment, these are the small pieces of story that make the Commonwealth come alive. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and if you enjoy these explorations, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. The world of Fallout 4 is filled with more than wasteland ruins and radiation. Beneath the surface of its open world lies a quiet layer of secrets, small choices, and unspoken details that most players pass without noticing. Every object, mural, and distant sound carries a trace of meaning that connects back to the larger story of a world rebuilding itself. Exploring these layers reveals just how carefully crafted the Commonwealth truly is. One of the first obscure details hides in plain sight at the beginning of the game. When the sole survivor stands in the kitchen before the bombs fall, the Mr. Handy robot, Codsworth, reads the player's name aloud. What makes this moment fascinating is that the developers recorded more than 900 names for him to pronounce. Each was recorded manually, with different inflections depending on the tone. From classic names to humorous ones, the sheer preparation for that single scene reflects a level of thought that most players never realize. After the war, stepping into the ruined house reveals another small but poignant touch. The baby's crib in Sanctuary Hills still has the same mobile hanging above it, gently swaying if the player bumps the side. Its spinning motion follows realistic physics, reacting as though time itself had stood still since the day the bombs fell. The attention to how even a broken toy behaves speaks to the detail Bethesda poured into environmental storytelling. When wandering through Concord early in the game, the player can find a store called Speakeasy. Inside, the shelves are lined with empty bottles and broken glasses, a nod to Prohibition-era bars. Hidden behind the counter is a small holotape recording of a pre-war patron singing softly before the sirens began to wail. It is not tied to any quest or collectible. It exists purely to add life to a place that existed moments before destruction. Diamond City, built inside the ruins of Fenway Park, contains countless layers of references and history that players often overlook. The dugout bars and vendor stalls are not just random designs, they correspond to the actual seating layout of the old baseball field. Bethesda recreated the geometry of Fenway so accurately that if you compare aerial shots of the real stadium and the in-game version, they match almost perfectly. Even the lighting grid and support beams above the stands follow the real-world pattern. The detail is not mentioned in dialogue, but it shapes how the city feels lived in. Another overlooked piece of design lies in the dialogue system itself. Fallout 4 was the first mainline Fallout game to feature a fully voiced protagonist, and the developers recorded over 13,000 lines of dialogue for each gender. To accommodate this, every line spoken by NPCs was tagged with emotional tones like sad, curious, or sarcastic. These tags were used to trigger the right facial animation for both the player character and the NPC. What many players don't realize is that some unused emotional tags remain in the game files, hinting at branching dialogue trees that were never implemented. Among the Commonwealth's many small details, the Red Rocket truck stops stand out. Their design draws directly from mid-century Americana, with their massive rocket sculptures serving as reminders of pre-war optimism. The one near Sanctuary is more than just decoration. It contains subtle environmental clues about its pre-war function. Inside, the workbench area includes an oil-stained note referencing Project Poseidon, which connects to Poseidon Energy, the same company seen in Fallout 3 and Fallout 76. This continuity links the games across generations, weaving small environmental hints into a shared universe. One of the most interesting environmental details can be found in the glowing sea. Amid the desolate, irradiated landscape, remnants of civilization still stand, half-buried roads, melted vehicles, and strange green puddles of glass-like material. These glass deposits are technically nuclear vitrification, a realistic scientific effect where sand melts into glass under extreme heat. Bethesda consulted real atomic test footage to model the texture and coloring of the terrain. When walking through these zones, the ground actually refracts light faintly under the player's feet, giving the illusion of fused glass from the nuclear blast. In Vault 81, one of the few functioning vaults, the developers added a detail that reflects real-world social structures. The vault's inhabitants have divided into two groups, the surface traders and the vault dwellers. Inside, if you listen closely, the residents use different accents depending on whether they regularly interact with outsiders. Traders use rougher slang and shorter sentences, while long-term vault residents speak in clear, formal tones. This linguistic difference was intentional, coded into their dialogue to reflect the cultural split that emerged after generations underground. At the Cambridge police station, where the Brotherhood of Steel first appears, a small audio detail separates Fallout 4 from its predecessors. When standing near Brotherhood radios, you can hear faint static Morse code patterns between transmissions. These are not random, they spell out the letters BOSS repeatedly in Morse code, a nod to the organization's discipline and coded communication. Players who understand Morse can decode it, revealing a small layer of authenticity rarely seen in other games. Even the iconic power armor has obscure design nuances. The T-Series armor seen throughout the Commonwealth is not uniform. The T-60 and T-45 variants differ not only in strength but also in manufacturing origin. The T-45 suits were designed by the U.S. Army and produced by West Tech, while the T-60 series were contracted to a different division under West Tech development partnerships late in the war. This explains the slight difference in color palettes. The T-60's smoother metallic finish was meant to reflect a shift in production materials due to resource shortages. One of the most haunting environmental details lies in the ruins of University Point. The area is home to a tragic story about greed and betrayal that plays out entirely through terminals and notes. The residents of the settlement discovered a working pre-war bank vault filled with caps and technology. When the Institute learned of it, they sent a synth infiltration team to seize it. By reading the scattered logs, the player discovers that the townspeople turned on each other before the Institute even arrived. It is a story of paranoia destroying community, told entirely through environment. The Institute itself is filled with subtle design choices meant to evoke emotion. Its white, sterile architecture draws from mid-century futurism and laboratories from the 1950s. However, its curved hallways and rounded edges are also psychological, intended to make visitors feel safe and comfortable, masking the organization's cold detachment from morality. If you walk slowly through the Institute's residential quarters, you can hear soft, ambient tones playing through hidden speakers. The sound design was crafted to mimic gentle heartbeats and breathing patterns, subtly calming the player's nervous system while exploring. Many of Fallout 4's locations also include tributes to real people. In the small town of Dunwich Borers, a reference to the works of H.P. Lovecraft, You can find carvings of tentacles and ritual circles etched into the quarry walls. Deep inside, a recording references the name Lorenzo Cabot, tying the supernatural side quest about the Cabot family to this location. What makes this detail stand out is how the developers embedded Lovecraftian horror into a science fiction world without breaking its logic. The strange energy of the artifact, the hallucinations, and the chanting workers all mirror Lovecraft's themes of madness and forbidden knowledge. Another subtle reference lies in the names of some minor NPCs. For example, the scavenger pair Anne and Jack, found near the Cambridge outskirts, are nods to the real-life archaeologists Anne and Jack Morrow, who excavated early American ruins in the 1950s. Their names appear in Bethesda's concept art notes as a tribute to pre-war history buffs, blending real archaeological figures into a fictional post-apocalypse. Even the smallest props tell stories. The in-game magazines, Grognak, The Barbarian, Tesla Science, and Astoundingly Awesome Tales, each feature unique cover art. But most players do not realize that every cover was painted at twice the resolution of standard textures. The extra detail was preserved so modders and artists could print them physically without quality loss. This quiet gesture shows how Bethesda intentionally left gifts for the creative community within their files. In the wasteland near the wreck of the Yangtze submarine, a small environmental story unfolds without a single line of dialogue. The captain, Zhao, is a ghoul who has survived for 2 centuries aboard his ship. What most players overlook is that his uniform's fabric is subtly different from every other naval outfit in the game. It carries a slight sheen meant to reflect synthetic preservation coating, implying that he had attempted to preserve his humanity before ghoulification began. This texture is unique to him and appears nowhere else. When exploring the Museum of Witchcraft, many players focus on the terrifying encounter with the Deathclaw, but there is another detail hidden in the surrounding area. A series of letters found in nearby homes describe children playing in the woods and hearing strange noises long before the bombs fell. These letters were added not for horror but for context. The museum had been haunted by fear even before the apocalypse. It's a small narrative thread that ties superstition and reality together. Even the random placement of skeletons throughout the Commonwealth is deliberate. Every skeleton tells a small story if you observe carefully. A skeleton holding a teddy bear beside a bunk bed, 2 skeletons embracing near a terminal, a skeleton slumped in front of a television surrounded by empty beer bottles. Each one was positioned manually by a level designer, who added small props around them to imply what those people were doing when the bombs fell. There are hundreds scattered throughout the game, none repeated, each unique in its silent storytelling. One of the most mysterious places in Fallout 4 is the town of Salem, found on the northeastern edge of the map. Many players visit the Museum of Witchcraft for the Deathclaw encounter and leave, unaware that the surrounding houses and streets are filled with connected clues. Hidden terminals and notes mention a collector of occult artifacts who vanished before the bombs fell. These details tie directly to the Cabot family storyline, suggesting that the strange energies at the museum and the Cabot serum may share a common pre-war origin. Bethesda never confirms it outright, but the implication deepens the connection between science and superstition that runs quietly throughout the Commonwealth. Not far from Salem lies a fishing shack that tells a story few ever notice. Inside, a skeleton sits at a table with a lantern and several bottles of Nuka-Cola Quantum. On the wall is a calendar dated October 23rd, the day of the Great War. The skeleton's hand rests over a half-finished note that reads only, "She never came back." This small scene, which is easy to miss, may represent one of the last moments before the bombs fell. The developers used subtle environmental storytelling rather than dialogue, allowing silence to fill in the tragedy. In the streets of Diamond City, there is a small visual detail that connects to real Boston baseball history. The outfield wall in the game's stadium includes faint numbers painted in green that match the retired player numbers from the actual Fenway Park. They are barely visible under layers of decay and graffiti, a quiet reminder that this city was once alive with cheering crowds before it became the center of wasteland commerce. The in-game radio hosts also carry more personality than most players realize. Travis Miles, the nervous DJ of Diamond City Radio, gradually gains confidence after his personal quest. What few notice is that even after completing his storyline, he will occasionally slip back into old habits if you leave the radio running long enough. The developers recorded alternate takes where he stammers briefly before recovering, reflecting that confidence is not a permanent change, but a process. In Vault 88, introduced through the Vault-Tec Workshop expansion, there is an entire layer of satire hidden in the research logs. Each experiment, designed by the Overseer, is deliberately absurd, referencing real historical psychological studies from the 20th century. The cycle of productivity experiment mirrors the Milgram obedience study, while the Phoropter experiment alludes to the Ash conformity trials. These parallels add depth to Fallout's theme of scientific hubris disguised as progress. The Minutemen, though often remembered for their Radiant settlement missions, hold a hidden story in the lore. In the castle, the old Minutemen headquarters, you can find pre-war documents in the armory that mention a unit called the Massachusetts State Defense Force. This group existed before the bombs and later evolved into the first Minutemen militias. The detail is not explained in dialogue, but reveals that the Minutemen were not entirely a post-war invention. They were inspired by the remnants of a civil defense organization designed to protect citizens during nuclear emergencies. Another overlooked feature involves the game's subtle use of sound to indicate radiation. When you enter an irradiated zone, you hear a faint, high-pitched tone layered under the Geiger counter clicks. The tone lowers in frequency as radiation levels drop. This auditory cue helps players subconsciously gauge safety without checking the interface. It was implemented after playtesters said they often missed danger warnings when exploring without a visible HUD. The underwater regions of Fallout 4 are rarely explored, yet they contain some of the game's most haunting secrets. Beneath the Charles River, near the broken bridge between Cambridge and Boston, lies a small ruined boat with a skeleton clutching a wooden chest. Inside the chest is a single gold bar and a note written in pre-war script that reads, "Worthless now." The scene is simple but poetic, a commentary on how value changes when the world ends. The developers added small air pockets and shafts of light that move realistically with the water currents, giving the sunken world a quiet melancholy. Another obscure reference lies within the game's crafting system. When you build at a weapons workbench, the sound of the power tools actually matches the rhythm of the Fallout 3 theme song. The team intentionally synchronized the mechanical grinding sounds so that players who listen closely might recognize the familiar tune hidden beneath the hum of machinery. It is a subtle nod to the series' continuity that most people overlook. At Good Neighbor, the Ghoul Mayor Hancock offers one of the most layered character designs in the game. His name, clothing, and personality are all deliberate tributes to the American revolutionary John Hancock. His coat is modeled after colonial governor uniforms, and even the red fabric was color matched from museum archives in Massachusetts. The irony of a ghoul wearing the clothes of an early American statesman reinforces Fallout's dark humor about freedom, decay, and persistence. Inside the memory den, you can access fragmented memories of various characters, but what few players realize is that the ambient music changes subtly depending on whose memory you enter. When revisiting the memories of Kellogg, for example, the background sound includes faint echoing gunshots and children's laughter mixed together. This was done to represent the contrast between his violent life and his lost humanity. For other memories, like the Institute scientists, the music adds low mechanical drones, creating a sense of detachment. These cues tell emotional stories without any spoken dialogue. The Institute's synths contain an unsettling hidden feature in their dialogue code. Even though they sound calm, their speech patterns include micropauses that mimic breathing. The developers added these to make them feel more human, but they accidentally caused lip sync issues during animation testing. Instead of removing the pauses, they kept them and added small visual tics in the synth's eyes that twitch every few seconds, making them seem just slightly imperfect. That subtle wrongness is part of what makes them feel uncanny. In the city of Quincy, there is a forgotten tragedy that explains the fall of the Minutemen before the game begins. Scattered notes in the ruined buildings tell how the Quincy survivors were betrayed by one of their own. The real twist is hidden deeper in the lore. The leader who abandoned them, Colonel Hollis, shares initials with another character mentioned only in Fallout Shelter, connecting the mobile spin-off's vault logs to the main timeline. It is a quiet link that shows how Bethesda tied even side projects into the main canon. Fallout 4's food items also hide clever details. Every type of pre-war preserved snack has a unique calorie count listed in the files, calculated using realistic numbers. Cram, for example, has about 900 calories per can, while Fancy Lad's snack cakes contain nearly twice that amount. None of this affects gameplay directly, but it reflects the developer's habit of grounding absurdity in real-world logic. Even in the apocalypse, the math of human sustenance remains. A lesser-known secret involves the game's radio static during the night. If you turn off all music and stand still in complete silence near certain towers, faint Morse signals can sometimes be heard. When decoded, these messages reference numbers corresponding to coordinates on the map, usually pointing to crashed satellites or hidden supply caches. Many of these were added as part of the Survival Mode update to reward exploration without markers. In Far Harbor, environmental storytelling reaches its most subtle form. When fog rolls across the island, the density dynamically increases near quest locations, but not for atmosphere alone. The fog contains hidden sound layers of distant whispers. Slowing the audio reveals reverse dialogue lines from the children of Adam chanting prayers. These are not random. They were recorded separately to reinforce the theme that the fog is both natural and divine to the cult members. The result is a haunting auditory illusion that makes the island feel alive. Some of the game's terminals hold personal connections to the developers themselves. In the robotics disposal ground, one entry describes an employee named M. Howard who keeps testing prototypes without authorization. This is an inside joke referencing Todd Howard's tendency to personally playtest systems until they broke. Similarly, another note from A. Maxon refers to an engineer wanting to fly with the Brotherhood someday, foreshadowing Elder Maxon's rise in the timeline. These small self-references blend real studio history into the lore of the world. The Pip-Boy, though a simple menu device for players, also carries quiet world-building details. The time displayed on the interface is always synced to the in-game clock, but when you pause the game, it freezes exactly as if you were glancing at a real wrist device. The developers even programmed the Pip-Boy light to pulse slightly, mimicking the low hum of pre-war electronics. If you lower the brightness and listen closely, the hum fades in rhythm with your character's breathing, creating a faint sense that the Pip-Boy itself is alive. At the edge of the map, near the glowing sea, stands a hidden research outpost buried under rubble. Inside, you can find broken lab equipment labeled Vault-Tec Quantum Material Study. Nearby are canisters filled with glowing blue residue identical to Nuka-Cola Quantum. This suggests that Vault-Tec may have helped Nuka World develop their drink formulas before the war. The connection is never mentioned outright, but it helps explain why Nuka-Cola Quantum reappears in so many parts of the Fallout universe. The animation team left one of their signatures in a place almost nobody sees. When you use the third-person camera and stand idle long enough, your character occasionally performs tiny gestures like scratching their wrist or adjusting their Pip-Boy strap. These animations are not random. They were motion captured from the same actors who recorded combat movements. The intent was to humanize the player character by giving them restless habits, even when doing nothing. One final quiet detail appears in the ending slides of Fallout 4. When describing the fate of certain settlements, the narrator's tone subtly changes depending on your karma history throughout the game, even though karma is not a visible mechanic. The system still tracks positive or negative actions behind the scenes, allowing the voice actor's delivery to sound slightly hopeful or disappointed. It is a hidden emotional layer that reflects the consequences of every small choice, reminding players that even unspoken actions shape the world. Deep within the Commonwealth lies a small, forgotten diner north of Boston that many players pass without a second glance. On the counter sits a single stack of plates, a coffee pot, and a half-eaten meal. The unusual thing about this diner is that the food models are completely unique and never used elsewhere in the game. They were created early in development for a planned system where pre-war meals would rot over time, visually decaying as years passed. The feature was cut, but this lone table still carries the prototype assets, a quiet echo of an idea that never made it into the final game. Another piece of lost design remains inside the combat zone, the rundown fight arena in Boston. Early concept art shows that this location was meant to host a full quest line involving a gang of raiders who staged performances for travelers. The developers even recorded crowd-cheering sound effects that can still be found in unused audio files. In the final game, the area is almost empty except for Kate and her captors, yet the leftover lighting rigs and elevated walkways hint at what the original version could have been, a grim carnival of violence echoing the decline of pre-war entertainment culture. The crafting benches that dot the Commonwealth also hold small engineering touches. Each one is built using pre-war industrial components labeled with brand logos that appear nowhere else. The red tool chests read Wilson Automatics, a reference to an unused corporation from Fallout 3's design notes. The brand was originally intended to appear as a rival to Robco Industries. These labels help link the scattered ruins of Fallout's America into a single corporate ecosystem, even when most players never notice them. In the heart of the glowing sea, there is a strange shack perched on a ledge overlooking a crater. Inside lies a skeleton surrounded by empty Nuka-Cola bottles, a radiation suit, and a half-broken terminal. Reading the terminal reveals a chilling message. It logs the writer's attempts to track radiation patterns, as if studying the bomb that destroyed the world. The final entry simply says, "I think it was beautiful." This darkly poetic moment shows Fallout's quiet fascination with human curiosity even at the end of civilization. One of the least known locations in the game is called Recon Bunker Theta. It is small and easy to overlook, yet it connects to a story that spans multiple Fallout titles. Inside, the Brotherhood Paladin Brandis is found living in isolation, convinced his team is still alive. His distress signals correspond to frequencies found in the radio towers of Fallout 3, creating a continuity that bridges the two games through subtle audio clues. The placement of his personal belongings and the emotional weight of his dialogue give the area a rare sense of personal tragedy. Fallout 4's companion characters also include unused material that reveals hidden sides of their personalities. Piper Wright, for instance, has dozens of unrecorded lines where she comments on historical artifacts and pre-war relics. The original plan was for her to write articles about them, which the player could later find printed in new editions of Public Occurrences. These lines were removed to save disk space, but remain buried in the game files. Had they been included, Piper's role as a journalist would have felt even richer, creating a sense of progress in the rebuilding of society. In contrast, Nick Valentine's dialogue contains small changes depending on the time of day. When speaking to him at night, his voice carries more echo and lower pitch due to a hidden sound filter. The developers wanted to simulate his old wiring reacting to nighttime humidity, an unnecessary yet immersive touch. His personal quest also hides a reference to a cut subplot about synthetic memory corruption. Early drafts described a program called the Valentine Reconciliation, meant to explain how his old personality as a pre-war detective conflicted with his new identity as a synth. Although it was never implemented, the leftover dialogue references still appear in data logs and design notes. Even the game's loading screens hide their own stories. Some of the text entries reference concepts not found in Fallout 4 at all, such as the Church of Adam's splinter sect near Far Harbor. These lines were meant to tease future expansions. Others, like rumors of a sea creature lurking near the coast, correspond to cut random encounters that were removed late in testing. Developers often used the loading tips to quietly preserve pieces of lore that would otherwise have been deleted. The interior of Vault 75 in Malden Middle School offers another layer of storytelling that most players overlook. The vault's design, which includes a classroom above and a testing facility below, reflects real-world Cold War fears of government control disguised as education. The developers based the vault's layout on blueprints from actual Fallout shelter plans drawn in the 1960s. Each hallway's curvature follows a psychological design pattern called corridor control, where rounded corners create comfort and compliance in confined spaces. It is a subtle architectural trick that makes the vault's experiments even more disturbing. An often missed environmental story unfolds at a small farm north of Concord, where the Scarecrow wears a pre-war soldier's helmet. Searching nearby reveals a broken-down power armor frame partially buried in dirt. This is a tiny memorial created by the family who lived there, honoring a relative who never came home from the front lines. There are no terminals or quest markers attached, but the placement of objects tells the story completely on its own. The realism of grief, embedded in such a small detail, captures Fallout's tone better than any dialogue could. Some of the game's most striking visual secrets hide in reflections. Inside the Museum of Freedom, if you look closely at the shattered display cases, you can see faint reflections of pre-war propaganda posters that are not actually in the room. These are ghost images deliberately baked into the glass textures to symbolize the echoes of the old world still trapped within preserved artifacts. It is a haunting visual metaphor for how history lingers even when forgotten. The Nuka World expansion also contains one of the cleverest developer signatures in the series. Deep in the Nuka World Transit Center's maintenance area, a wall graffiti reads, "Project Refresh Complete." The initials of the phrase P and R correspond to two environment artists, Patrick Reed and Ryan Prosser, who worked on the expansion's lighting. Their initials appear throughout the DLC in random graffiti tags, acting as hidden credits woven into the environment. The robots scattered throughout Fallout 4 hold their own set of hidden personality traits. Mr. Handy models, for instance, have unused voice lines meant to simulate exhaustion after combat. These were recorded with filters that gradually distorted the audio, making it sound as though their gears were grinding down. The feature was removed because it confused playtesters who thought their companions were malfunctioning. However, these lines remain buried in the game's code, revealing how the developers wanted even machines to show fatigue. A quiet but powerful moment of world building can be found in the Mass Fusion building. At the top level, overlooking the ruined city, lies a meeting table with coffee cups and folders arranged in a semicircle. The documents are all labeled with pre-war department names like Weapons Integration and Civilian Energy Program. The arrangement mirrors the shape of the United Nations Security Council table, intentionally symbolizing how corporate power replaced diplomacy in Fallout's timeline. The more you study the details, the clearer the message becomes that greed, not war itself, was the true cause of the apocalypse. When visiting the railroad headquarters, one of the many scattered terminals includes logs describing the difficulty of distinguishing between synthetic and human behavior. One log lists questions used to test identity, like favorite foods or earliest memories. These are direct references to the Voight-Kampff test from the film Blade Runner, which inspired much of the Institute's ethical dilemma. This subtle connection turns Fallout 4's story into a continuation of the broader science fiction conversation about artificial life and morality. A fascinating mechanical detail appears in the use of chems. Jet, the inhaled stimulant that slows time, includes subtle visual distortion that is not random. It imitates the blooming effect of an actual chemical stimulant studied during the 1970s called cyclohexamine. The art team researched this visual distortion by observing how light refracts through gas and vapor in enclosed spaces. The result is a remarkably realistic simulation of altered perception, even though most players experience it only for a few seconds. On the edge of the glowing sea sits a small radio tower that broadcasts nothing but faint humming. If you isolate the sound and amplify it, you can hear the tune of "The Stars and Stripes Forever," the same patriotic march that appears on military holotapes throughout the series. The transmission's static timing suggests it is still being played automatically by a pre-war system looping endlessly. It serves as an eerie reminder that some machines in Fallout continue to perform their duties long after anyone is left to hear them. Many of Fallout 4's subtle storytelling moments come from the placement of unique items. The baseball grenades, crafted by the player, are more than a novelty weapon. Their design file is labeled Red Sox Commemorative Model, confirming that they were meant to represent the last surviving pieces of Boston's sports culture turned into weapons. Even destruction in Fallout carries traces of nostalgia. Deep beneath Boston, in the forgotten utility tunnels near Park Street Station, lies one of the rarest environmental features in the game. Water drips echo rhythmically in the same pattern as the heartbeat sound used when the player is near death. The sound designers intentionally match the tempo to create subconscious tension. It is a subtle example of audio storytelling, where the environment anticipates danger before it even appears. At the edge of the map, in the far northwest, stands a small cottage surrounded by trees. Inside, a terminal entry references an event called Operation Blue Pegasus. This phrase never appears anywhere else in Fallout lore, yet in early design documents, it was listed as the codename for a cut quest involving a crashed vertibird and experimental armor. The location remains as a quiet placeholder, its purpose erased, but not forgotten. The layers of cut ideas, preserved details, and half-finished stories throughout Fallout 4 give the game its unique depth. Every prop, every sound, every scrap of paper feels like a whisper from a vanished world. Bethesda's designers often describe their work not as building a game, but as simulating decay, crafting a living museum of a world that once dreamed of progress. In the ruins of Boston's financial district, there is a small bank building that most players never enter. Inside, the vault door stands open, revealing empty safes and scattered money piles. What is unusual is that the deposit slips left on the counter show dates from just one day before the Great War. The employees must have tried to finish their final transactions before running for cover. One of the slips reads, "Deposit for Mrs. K. McDonough," which is the same surname as the mayor of Diamond City, suggesting that the mayor's family once held a bank account here. This tiny link connects the old world to the political figures of the new one. South of Diamond City lies a small pond where a skeleton sits beside a tipped-over suitcase. Inside the suitcase are two items, a pre-war wedding ring and a bottle of Day Tripper. The placement of the objects suggests a story of heartbreak and escapism told with no words at all. The environment artists referred to scenes like this as micro-narratives, moments that could be read in seconds but remembered for hours. The irradiated swamps north of the city hide another secret that few players discover. Beneath the water, near a rusted shack, lies a submerged billboard showing an advertisement for Vault-Tec. The slogan reads, "Your future is secure underground." The irony is immediate, but the developers took it further. The billboard's metal support is twisted into a spiral, mimicking the shape of a mushroom cloud. It is a piece of visual storytelling that shows how propaganda literally collapsed under its own promise. Within the Corvega assembly plant, where players often face waves of raiders early in the game, the factory floor contains a surprising amount of detail. Every workbench has unique clutter, from unfinished car frames to scattered documents referencing production quotas. One of these memos complains about the shortage of coolant fluid and is signed by an employee named S. Wilson, referencing the same fictional corporation that appears on the red toolboxes found throughout the Commonwealth. The consistency of such details builds a believable world, even when the player never notices the connection. At the General Atomics Galleria, the cheerful robots that greet the player each have names referencing real-world automation companies. The greeter named Mr. Handy Robco, for example, combines two major manufacturers from Fallout's lore. Even the music playing through the loudspeakers is authentic big band swing from the 1940s, licensed specifically for the location. Bethesda deliberately used cheerful pre-war music in decaying settings to create emotional dissonance, a design choice that began with Fallout 3 and continued here to amplify nostalgia. In the distant northeast corner of the map stands an unmarked hill overlooking the ocean. The top of this hill contains a makeshift grave surrounded by empty whiskey bottles and a single dog collar. The grave marker reads only "Loyal to the End." Many players believe this is a reference to Dogmeat's ancestors, while others see it as a general memorial to the countless loyal pets lost in the war. Whatever its origin, the simple arrangement conveys more emotion than any spoken line could. A detail that often goes unnoticed exists in the wreckage of the USS Constitution, the pre-war ship run by robots. When it fires its cannons during its quest line, each blast produces a subtle echo delay depending on the direction of fire. The sound design was carefully modeled to simulate how echoes would behave across Boston Harbor. This small touch gives the ship's final launch scene a cinematic grandeur that feels alive even within the stillness of the game world. At Vault 81, the doctor's medical scanners emit faint tones while active. Those tones follow a repeating rhythm of 4 quick beeps followed by one long one. This pattern translates to the letters V and O in Morse code, standing for Vault Overseer. It is a small hidden signature from the sound engineers that most players would never consciously detect. The intention was to give the vault's ambient sounds a coded sense of order, just as its society tries to maintain structure amid chaos. Inside the Super Duper Mart, beyond the obvious scavenging opportunities, you can find a sign in the back room labeled Employee of the Month. The photo shows a smiling man holding a box of Sugar Bomb cereal. His name tag reads Tim. In Fallout lore, this same brand of cereal appears in multiple games, and in each, someone named Tim is associated with its marketing. It is a running inside joke among developers, a tiny thread connecting the humor of the franchise across decades. At the Cambridge Polymer Labs, players often remember the quest involving polymer research, but there is more hidden in the surrounding offices. Several terminals mention an experimental fabric called BioWeave, which was intended for use in spacesuits. This connects directly to a cut location called the Mars Simulation Facility, which would have shown pre-war experiments preparing for interplanetary travel. While the location never made it into the final game, these leftover references imply that humanity's ambition extended far beyond the Earth before the bombs fell. The castle, once the Minutemen headquarters, contains its own quiet mysteries. In the rubble beneath the walls, you can find several broken musical instruments. The notes on nearby papers mention plans for a freedom festival, suggesting that the Minutemen used to hold celebrations before the organization fell into ruin. The small remnants of song and joy buried beneath the fortress serve as a reminder that hope existed even in the harshest times. In Vault 75's control room, there is a small panel labeled Emergency Purge. Pressing it has no visible effect, but in the game's files, it triggers a flag called Vault Child Release. This was meant to open a hidden section of the vault where the children used for genetic experiments would escape. The sequence was cut before release, but the variable remains, a silent trace of a story that was almost told. The hardware stores scattered throughout the map contain boxes labeled Westing Refrigeration. That company name has appeared in nearly every Fallout game since the original, always attached to appliances and machinery. It is Bethesda's tribute to the real-world Westinghouse Corporation, one of the inspirations for Fallout's retro-futuristic technology. Every glowing fridge, flickering monitor, and humming power generator traces its design lineage back to that vision of industrial optimism. In the railroad safe houses, most players overlook the paintings on the walls. Each safe house contains a portrait of a historical abolitionist. The portrait in Mercer Safe House depicts Harriet Tubman, while the one in Ticonderoga Safe House shows Frederick Douglass. These paintings quietly reinforce the railroad's moral alignment, connecting their cause to real-world struggles for freedom. The inclusion of these artworks was not meant to be obvious, but to subconsciously communicate dignity and courage. Another forgotten gem lies within the Beantown Brewery. On one of the walls, faded graffiti reads, "No more tastings until the world ends." The irony of this message resonates when you realize the brewery sits directly beneath an unexploded bomb crater. The developers later confirmed that this was intentional, a dark joke suggesting the employees quite literally got their wish. In the depths of the glowing sea, near the crater of Adam, lies a small cave that serves as a resting spot for a wandering ghoul scientist. His notes discuss radiation as if it were a spiritual force rather than a scientific phenomenon. The writing mirrors real-world journals from Cold War physicists who expressed awe at the beauty of atomic energy. This blend of faith and science captures one of Fallout's core themes, humanity's attempt to find meaning in its own destruction. Even the bridges crossing the Charles River tell quiet stories. Many have graffiti declaring loyalty to specific factions, but a few display symbols not seen anywhere else. One in particular shows a stylized atom merged with a heart, believed to represent a small splinter group of the children of Adam who viewed radiation as love rather than punishment. These hidden markings suggest that belief in the post-war world takes many strange and personal forms. The terminals inside the Boston Public Library contain an overlooked note written by an anonymous survivor. It reads, "If knowledge survives, we survive." The phrase repeats several times in later Fallout titles, showing up in graffiti and mission logs. It has become a quiet motto of post-war humanity, an echo of how even small ideas persist longer than the people who wrote them. At the very edge of the glowing sea stands a collapsed radio tower. Beneath the debris is a corpse wearing a pre-war engineer's uniform. His name tag reads R. Gray, and next to him lies a broken transmitter with a typed note that says, "They said it would be beautiful." This connects to the earlier scientist's message, forming a thematic pair. Two strangers, miles apart, both witnessed the same end and described it with the same haunting word. The deeper you explore Fallout 4's world, the clearer it becomes that its beauty lies not in its grand quests, but in its smallest moments. Every faded billboard, cracked terminal, and broken cup is placed with purpose. The Commonwealth breathes through these details, speaking softly through the things it left behind. Deep below the surface of the Commonwealth, in a forgotten metro tunnel near Park Street Station, a flickering light shines against the concrete walls. Behind a collapsed section of debris lies a hidden terminal powered by a small generator. Reading its entries reveals a list of stored access codes, one of which is labeled Project Lantern. The terminal describes tests for sustainable underground lighting using bioluminescent algae, an early Vault-Tec experiment abandoned before the war. While the location never connects to any quest, its quiet existence hints that the company's influence reached far beyond the vaults themselves. One of the most curious environmental details sits inside Vault 81's classrooms. The children's textbooks mention stories about a mythical hero named the Mechanist, who built machines to help humanity. This was intentionally written decades before the events of the Automatron expansion, implying that the Mechanist legend was known long before the player meets the character. The developers used this as a narrative echo, blending myth and future events into one continuous timeline. In the Mass Fusion building, high above the ruined skyline, an office contains a framed photograph of a man holding a prototype energy cell. The photo's caption reads, "First Plasma Ignition, March 27th. It references the birth of the Mass Fusion Core technology, a precursor to the fusion cores that power armor. This single detail ties Fallout's most iconic equipment to a real-world sense of innovation. At the Boston airport, the Brotherhood of Steel's Vertibird landing pad has a unique piece of audio design. When standing under the rotors as they spin down, the pitch of the whine shifts slightly depending on the player's position, imitating real acoustic Doppler effects. Sound engineers spent weeks recording helicopters to make the noise pattern as realistic as possible, giving the metallic roar an almost musical rhythm. This detail is never mentioned in developer interviews, but its realism immerses players without them realizing why. The glowing sea remains one of Fallout 4's most mysterious regions. Beneath its ashen layers lies the half-buried wreck of a satellite array. Inside one of the control rooms, you can find a terminal entry labeled "Mission Cancelled, Lunar Relay." The text describes a project designed to establish communication between Earth and an orbiting lunar station. The cancellation date matches October 22nd, the day before the bombs fell. This subtle connection implies that humanity was still reaching for the stars, even as the world prepared to end. On the outskirts of Lexington, there is a hidden construction site surrounded by broken scaffolding. Beneath one of the steel beams lies a toolbox containing an unopened bottle of Nuka-Cola Quantum and a note reading, "For my daughter's birthday." This moment of quiet humanity shows the contrast between optimism and devastation. The developer who placed this item later revealed that it was inspired by a real story of a father who left a time capsule for his child before being deployed in war. Inside the Institute's robotics lab, several control panels display lines of unreadable code. If translated from hexadecimal, the code spells out the phrase, "We are our own worst creation." It is a small, self-aware message from one of the game's programmers who wanted to reflect the Institute's philosophical struggle. These hidden strings serve no gameplay purpose, but they add depth for anyone who decides to explore the files or examine the details closely. The Museum of Freedom, where the player first meets Preston Garvey, has an overlooked symbol carved into one of the wooden beams above the entrance. It is the logo of the Minutemen, an hourglass framed by a circle carved with precise symmetry. The developers confirmed this was not placed for decoration, but to represent the idea that time is always running out. The hourglass becomes a quiet motif throughout the game, reminding players of impermanence and the passage of centuries since the bombs fell. In the combat zone, where Kate can be recruited, the ticket booth at the entrance contains a small audio tape labeled 53. When played, it reveals a brief recording of crowd noises, followed by a man yelling, "And they said entertainment was dead." The file name in the game's data lists it as "Laugh Before the Fall." This eerie mix of joy and destruction embodies Fallout's fascination with how laughter survives, even amid ruins. The Red Rocket truck stops across the Commonwealth share more than visual design. Each one hides a secret compartment behind the main counter. In most of them, the compartment is empty, But at one specific red rocket north of Boston, a stash of bottle caps and a toy alien figure can be found. This connects back to the UFO crash site, suggesting that the same worker might have been collecting alien memorabilia. The alien toy model is unique and does not appear anywhere else in the game. At Bunker Hill, if the player visits late at night, the surrounding Brahmin caravans occasionally emit low humming sounds. These hums are not mechanical errors, but recordings of real cattle slowed to half speed. The sound designers layered them beneath the ambient music to create a feeling of uneasy peace. The blending of nature and machine forms one of Fallout's most subtle atmospheric techniques, giving the wasteland a rhythm that feels alive even when nothing moves. The railroad's headquarters contains an unused object hidden behind a wall panel, visible only through console commands. It is a small plaque engraved with the phrase, "Truth finds freedom." This was intended to appear during a scrapped scene where the player could attend a memorial for fallen agents. Although the sequence was removed, the plaque remains as a symbolic artifact buried within the game. Inside Fort Hagen, where the player confronts Kellogg, a dusty office holds a small globe resting on a desk. Turning it reveals a faint scorch mark along the equator. The art team confirmed that this detail represents a global burn line, symbolizing how nuclear fire circled the planet. The mark is subtle and easy to miss, but ties into Fallout's broader theme of worldwide destruction, not just local devastation. In the old Gunners Plaza, which serves as the base of the mercenary group known as the Gunners, a small room in the basement contains a collection of dog tags hanging from a board. Each tag bears a different serial number and letter code, referencing real employees from Bethesda's Quality Assurance Department. They use their initials as a hidden credit sequence. These small signatures appear throughout the Fallout series, connecting the developers themselves to the worlds they build. A forgotten detail about the Brotherhood of Steel's vertibirds is hidden in their flight call signs. Each vertibird number begins with a letter corresponding to its base of origin. For example, flights that operate from the Prydwen begin with the letter P, while scouting teams from the airport begin with the letter A. The pattern mirrors real-world military call systems and adds another layer of authenticity for players who pay attention to their radios. The Pip-Boy interface has a hidden calibration feature that most players never notice. If you leave the screen idle long enough, the display begins to dim slightly before brightening again. This subtle flicker imitates the behavior of vintage CRT monitors, which would occasionally struggle to maintain brightness. The flicker is purely cosmetic, yet it adds a quiet realism that ties the Pip-Boy's design to Fallout's retro-futuristic vision of technology. In Far Harbor, a remote cabin near the cliffs contains a note written by a character named Old Longfellow. The letter mentions the day the fog turned to music. The line refers to a cut quest where the island's fog was going to emit audible tones before a storm. This poetic piece of writing is all that remains of the idea, yet it captures the haunting beauty that defines Fallout's tone. A peculiar feature in Fallout 4's Animal AI reveals how much care went into even the smallest systems. Brahmin, the two-headed cows used for trade, will always lie down near a campfire if one is present, even if it belongs to another faction. This behavior was programmed manually to simulate their instinct for warmth. It serves no gameplay purpose, but adds subtle realism to settlement life. Another fascinating mechanical secret exists in the game's power armor system. When standing still in a storm while wearing armor, the sound of raindrops hitting the metal changes based on the model of the suit. The T-60 produces a duller thud compared to the sharp tapping of the T45 because the former has thicker plating. The sound team recorded real metallic sheets to capture this variance, layering them beneath the environmental audio so the difference feels natural rather than scripted. The Overseer's Guardian is a unique two-shot combat rifle sold by Alexis Combs in Vault 81. The weapon's unique mod description includes the phrase, "a relic of trust." This is more than a poetic touch. It refers to the fact that the rifle was originally meant to be a gift from the Overseer to her chosen successor, representing continuity of leadership. When the vault opened to the outside world, it symbolized trust extending beyond the vault's walls. Finally, deep within the Institute's central reactor chamber, the polished white floor tiles reflect light with perfect precision, yet one tile in the corner is slightly darker than the rest. It hides the initials of the lead lighting artist carved faintly into its texture map. This was not vanity, but tradition. Every Fallout title since the third has contained at least one hidden signature from the lighting team. It is their way of leaving a mark on the endless glow of the post-war world. At the edge of the Commonwealth, near the border of the glowing sea, lies a small collapsed farmhouse surrounded by scorched cornfields. Inside the basement, beneath a pile of wooden debris, sits a locked safe with a holotape titled Harvest Report. When played, it contains only a man's voice quietly reading crop yields for the year 1977 before fading into static. The year predates the Great War by decades, making it impossible within the timeline, but the inclusion was deliberate. It was meant to imply that the farmer reused an old tape long after its original purpose, giving a sense of history recycled even in the smallest of ways. In the center of Diamond City's upper market, there is a bench with a small plaque that reads, "In memory of the fans." The placement of this plaque is intentional. It sits beside the stadium's seating where baseball crowds would have gathered before the war. The inscription serves as a hidden dedication from Bethesda to the community that kept Fallout alive through years of modding and fan projects. While never mentioned in the game, it stands quietly as a tribute to the passion that shaped the series. Within the wreckage of the CIT ruins, one of the game's most lore-rich yet overlooked terminals can be found. The logs mention a research project called Synthetic Neural Mapping, which predates the Institute's founding. These experiments were led by pre-war scientists who intended to create artificial human empathy as a psychological study. The records end abruptly, but the information suggests that the Institute did not invent synthetic humans. From nothing, they inherited the remnants of these early projects. Fallout's story of technological legacy is written here in fragments, waiting for attentive players to uncover it. Inside the Prydwen, the Brotherhood of Steel airship, there are subtle touches that reflect the organization's beliefs. The banners hanging along the hallways all display the same logo, but if you examine them closely, the gear in the emblem spins clockwise on one side of the ship and counterclockwise on the other. This symbolizes the Brotherhood's dual nature: progress through preservation and destruction through obsession. Only a handful of players ever notice this mirrored symbolism, yet it encapsulates the faction's identity perfectly. In the combat zone, the stage lights used during the boss encounter with Kate's captors each cast a slightly different hue of orange. The designers calibrated them to match the color temperature of real stage lighting from the 1950s. The lights flicker at random intervals, not for performance reasons, but to reflect faulty wiring in a building that has survived 2 centuries of neglect. Every flicker was hand-timed to make the arena feel truly alive. The Museum of Witchcraft hides one of Fallout 4's darkest unmarked stories. Behind a broken display case lies a single pre-war newspaper article about a missing child named Samuel. The article never appears anywhere else, but the name matches a boy referenced in a letter found miles away in a cabin near Dunwich Borers. The implication is that the child's disappearance and the quarry's supernatural activities are connected, forming a small network of unseen horror threaded through the game's world. In Vault 88, there is an unused room with a large sealed door labeled Section C. Although inaccessible without console commands, it contains crates filled with food labeled Vault-Tec canned protein. The texture on the cans reveals a logo reading Soylent Subdivision, a tongue-in-cheek reference to the old science fiction film Soylent Green. This small joke serves as another example of Fallout's mix of dark humor and corporate dystopia, blending satire with the world's grim tone. South of Sanctuary, near the bridge leading toward Concord, you can find a skeleton sitting on a rock, gazing at the horizon. Next to it lies a broken camera, a picnic basket, and a holotape titled Our Last Trip. Playing it reveals the voices of a couple discussing their plans to leave the city for a weekend getaway. The last words before the tape cuts off are, "We'll get there before sunset." This scene, placed so close to the player's starting point, is one of Fallout's earliest unspoken reminders that every ruin once belonged to someone. Inside the ruins of the Saugus Ironworks, where the Forged Gang resides, a terminal entry references a shipment labeled Crimson Alloy. This material is never found in-game, but its properties match the description of the unique metal used to construct the shish kebab, a flaming sword weapon from Fallout 3. The connection suggests that the Forged are descendants of the same industrial lineage, still clinging to the technology that defined their fiery obsession. At the edge of the glowing sea, in a cave filled with broken power armor frames, there is a skeleton sitting in front of a chalkboard covered in equations. The writing describes calculations for energy output and particle decay consistent with fusion power. The skeleton wears a lab coat labeled West Tech, the company responsible for the forced evolutionary virus. This connection ties the region's destruction directly to the scientific ambition that created the super mutants, making the glowing sea both a grave and a laboratory. In the underground tunnels beneath Boston, many walls are covered with graffiti that at first appears random. However, some of the markings correspond to navigation symbols used by real-world hobos during the Great Depression. A triangle with two parallel lines means safe camp, while a circle with an arrow means keep moving. The artists intentionally included these symbols as a nod to the idea that human survival codes endure through every collapse of society. At the Nuka World Transit Center, before boarding the monorail, players can find a series of small posters advertising destinations like Nuka World Safari and Galactic Zone. The fine print on these posters mentions a Family Pass program, and if you zoom in, you can read the name of the spokesperson, Sierra Petrovita. This ties directly to the Nuka-Cola obsessed collector from Fallout 3, showing that her obsession was a lifelong journey that began even before the events of the earlier game. Within the ruins of the Boston Public Library, the library terminals list several overdue books that reference real-world literary classics like Fahrenheit 451 and The Time Machine. These are not just Easter eggs. They were included to reflect Fallout's recurring theme of technology outpacing humanity's moral understanding. The presence of these books among the ashes of the old world reinforces how knowledge, both saved and doomed civilization. A hidden radio signal called Signal Echo Charlie can be detected in the far northern wilderness near the map's edge. The transmission plays distorted music, followed by a faint voice repeating coordinates. The voice belongs to the same actor who played the Enclave radio host in Fallout 3, suggesting a possible remnant of that faction still broadcasting from somewhere beyond the Commonwealth. The signal never leads to a quest, leaving its meaning forever open to interpretation. The Atom Cat's garage hides a small tribute to Fallout's earliest fans. Inside the workshop, the jukebox plays a custom remix of Rocket 69, a song from the original Fallout soundtrack. The inclusion was a secret homage to longtime players who would recognize the tune. Even the Atom Cat's motto, "Power to the People in Power Armor," was inspired by fan-made slogans from online forums before Fallout 4's release. In Goodneighbor, Hancock's private quarters contain a bookshelf filled with books whose titles are blurred. By examining the spines carefully, you can make out faint words like revolutionary thought, a tale of two cities, and civic responsibility. These reflect Hancock's identity as a ghoul revolutionary and symbolize his belief that even in a broken knot world, ideas still matter. The placement of those titles was chosen specifically to parallel his dialogue about freedom and self-governance. At the ruined elementary school south of Concord, chalk drawings on the classroom floor depict mushroom clouds, stick figures, and airplanes. This haunting artwork captures the imagination of children who live their final days under the shadow of nuclear fear. One drawing includes a line of stick figures holding hands under the words, "It's okay." The phrase feels almost like a message meant for the player, echoing through centuries of silence. Inside the Federal Surveillance Center K-21B, one of Fallout 4's strangest underground locations, there are terminals describing the use of prototype facial recognition systems. One log mentions the project leader's excitement over testing the system at a baseball game in Diamond City. This implies that even before the bombs fell, the government was secretly monitoring citizens in public spaces. Fallout's world is filled with such subtle warnings about how safety and control often blur into the same thing. In Far Harbor, a cave filled with glowing fungus contains a skeleton clutching a glowing holotape labeled "For the Future." Playing it reveals a man describing his hope that the island will someday heal from radiation. As the tape fades, the light from the fungus pulses slowly in rhythm with his final words. The visual synchronization was not scripted, but happens naturally because of how the engine handles light flicker, creating a haunting coincidence between nature and technology. A final detail that many overlook involves the Commonwealth's night sky. If you look closely on clear nights, you can see faint trails of light crossing the stars. These are not random effects. They represent old satellites still orbiting the Earth, remnants of the pre-war world that continue to circle endlessly above the ruins. The sight is subtle, but it adds a profound sense of continuity, suggesting that while humanity fell, its creations still move silently through the darkness. In the center of Boston stands a half-collapsed skyscraper known as the Shamrock Tap House. The tavern's walls are lined with old beer advertisements, but one stands out from the rest. It shows a smiling couple clinking glasses beneath the slogan, "Here's to another 100 years." The irony of that phrase, frozen in a world that ended only a few decades later, captures Fallout's blend of optimism and ruin. If you listen closely while standing near the sign, you can hear faint music leaking from hidden speakers that play an old Irish tune, a tiny nod to the bar's name and the history of Boston's Irish immigrants who helped shape the city. To the west of Diamond City, a small trailer park sits beside a cracked highway. One trailer contains a terminal entry describing an amateur radio hobbyist who spent his final days trying to reach anyone on the airwaves. The last log reads, "Still no answer, but someone out there is listening." This same message appears scratched into the walls of a separate bunker miles away, implying that the radio signal was received by another survivor. Fallout's world is full of these invisible connections, small threads of human contact stretching across the desolation. The Corvega assembly plant, known for its early raid encounter, hides an overlooked room deep beneath the main factory floor. Inside is a dusty terminal referencing a prototype called the Corvega Atomic 200. This was intended to be a nuclear-powered sedan capable of driving for years without refueling. The design was based on real mid-century experiments with atomic cars, showing Fallout's careful fusion of genuine history and satire. While the car never made it past testing, the inclusion of these notes gives depth to the game's vision of a world obsessed with convenience and progress at any cost. At the Old North Church, where the railroad hides its headquarters, a faint organ melody can be heard echoing through the halls. It is not random ambient music, but a slowed version of Amazing Grace, recorded on an antique pipe organ. The developers chose that hymn because it had been played at both funerals and revolutions throughout American history. The sound, distant and haunting, becomes a musical metaphor for the railroad's mission of redemption and freedom. In the middle of the glowing sea, there is a downed vertibird, half buried in the sand. Inside lies a single pilot skeleton, still gripping the controls. The nearby terminal contains flight coordinates that trace a circular route over the Commonwealth. The path mirrors the orbit of a reconnaissance drone found in Fallout 3, showing continuity in the Brotherhood's surveillance patterns across different games. The pilot's death in the middle of nowhere adds a quiet sense of futility to their endless vigilance. North of Boston, near the ruins of a radio tower, stands a makeshift campsite surrounded by dozens of empty tin cans. In the center sits a cooking pot with a ladle and a note that reads, "Too quiet tonight." If the player visits this spot at night, the wind picks up and plays through the cans, producing a faint whistling sound. The environmental designers called this the ghost wind, a purely natural sound that acts like an accidental music box for the dead. The USS Constitution, the ship run by eccentric robots, has its own share of overlooked detail. When it finally launches and sails into the distance, if you stand still and look toward the horizon, you can spot the faint glow of its engines long after it vanishes. That light is not just a trick of rendering. It is a small, persistent object traveling through the game's skybox, a technical detail meant to make the ship feel like it truly continues its journey beyond the map. Inside the ruins of Medford Memorial Hospital, the surgical floor contains a set of rusty instruments laid out on a table. One of them, a small saw, bears an inscription reading, "First, do no harm." The irony is chilling given the hospital's current state, but the placement of the saw beside bloodied restraints suggests that this oath was long forgotten. These visual contrasts appear throughout Fallout, reminding players that morality erodes alongside civilization. The small town of Jamaica Plain, often remembered for its treasure of the town quest, hides more than gold and memorabilia. In one of the nearby houses, a child's bedroom still has a glowing nightlight powered by a working fusion cell. the light never flickers or fades, suggesting it has been running continuously for 2 centuries. The developers place this as a metaphor for innocence that endures even in decay. The gentle glow of that tiny light is among the most haunting and beautiful images in the Commonwealth. Near the coast, the wreck of a fishing vessel lies half submerged in the water. Inside the cabin, a skeleton slumps against the wall beside a crate filled with preserved fish. A note beside it reads, "The sea still gives." The line is both literal and symbolic, implying that even in the apocalypse, nature continues to provide in small, stubborn ways. Fallout's wasteland often feels dead, but details like this show that life and hope linger quietly in unexpected places. In Vault 88, if you activate the loudspeakers while exploring, you can sometimes hear a faint voice reading what sounds like pre-war safety announcements. These were actual recordings from the 1950s public service programs, licensed for the game's ambient use. The idea was to blend authentic propaganda with Fallout's fictional future, blurring the line between our history and theirs. At the edge of the map near Salem, the remains of a crashed vertibird can be found beside a small campfire. The pilot's log describes a failed attempt to deliver supplies to Vault 95, which appears in Fallout 4's southern region. This creates a looped story between 2 separate locations, showing how one person's mission becomes another's mystery. Bethesda often used this storytelling technique to make the world feel interconnected, as though unseen lives continued beyond the player's view. A particularly touching hidden story unfolds near Walden Pond, a location inspired by the writings of Henry David Thoreau. In the cabin beside the water, a terminal entry quotes the philosopher's reflections on solitude and simplicity. The player can find a holotape titled "My Own Walden," recorded by a man who tried to live free of technology before the war. His words end mid-sentence as sirens sound in the distance. The thematic link between Thoreau's ideals and Fallout's desolate world reinforces the game's meditation on independence, progress, and destruction. In the ruins of the Gunners Plaza, a recording studio contains a single intact microphone. When you approach it, faint static hums through the speakers, and if you listen long enough, a brief voice can be heard saying, "Testing, testing." This was recorded by one of the sound engineers as a hidden signature, a quiet echo of the people behind the game who, in their own way, left ghosts scattered across the Commonwealth. The Boston Airport's exterior has a series of small wind turbines that spin intermittently. They do not connect to any power grid, but their motion is linked to the in-game weather system. They turn faster when storms approach and slow during clear days. This is not mentioned anywhere in the files, but it creates a subtle sense that even abandoned technology responds to the world's natural rhythms. Inside the ruined headquarters of Hallucigen Incorporated, chemical vats line the walls, still glowing faintly. When the player releases the gas during the mission there, the light intensity increases by small increments, depending on how many enemies are defeated. The visual effect was meant to symbolize the spreading of the experimental gas through the building, reflecting how human conflict and scientific recklessness feed each other. A small, easily missed reference exists in the glowing sea near the crashed space capsule. The astronaut's body found there is labeled as USSA Officer. The acronym refers to the United States Space Administration, a fictional agency within Fallout's lore. What most players do not realize is that the letters on his helmet spell EP, which matches the initials of Emil Pagliarulo, the game's design director. This is another hidden developer signature, disguised as lore. The town of Covenant, built around ideals of perfection, hides a chilling detail in its testing center. The clipboard on the receptionist's desk includes a question about kittens playing in the sundae. That line is directly borrowed from a psychological empathy test used in the 1950s to detect sociopathy. The fact that Fallout reuses it here connects the game's science fiction to real-world moral experimentation, reinforcing its central critique of progress without compassion. A lesser-known sound secret exists in the background music of Fallout 4's loading screens. The soft, ambient notes occasionally include a faint heartbeat rhythm layered under the orchestra. This heartbeat plays only when loading specific areas tied to Vault-Tec, representing the lingering presence of humanity inside the company's machinery. The inclusion is so subtle that many players never consciously hear it, yet it makes the waiting moments between gameplay feel quietly alive. Another powerful example of storytelling through silence appears in the ruins of the Fiddler's Green trailer park. The area is filled with identical campers, but one contains a hand-drawn map taped to the wall. The map outlines a plan to evacuate the elderly residents to a local shelter, marked with the words, "They are too slow." Nearby lies a wheelchair and a blanket draped over a skeleton. No dialogue, no quest, just an image of love and regret captured forever in a single moment. At the very edge of the glowing sea, an abandoned satellite dish points toward the sky. Its control panel still blinks with faint power. The signal it sends, if decoded, transmits a short, repeating message: "We are still here." It is unclear who sent it, or if anyone remains to receive it, but the message embodies Fallout's heart in 6 simple words, a whisper of survival echoing through the endless silence. In the ruins of Cambridge Polymer Labs, the player encounters a robotic receptionist named Molly, who continues to follow pre-war corporate routines long after the company has collapsed. Her dialogue lines are calm and professional, yet if you stand idle for a few minutes, she hums an old jingle under her breath, a melody adapted from a real 1950s detergent advertisement. The audio was mixed so softly that most players never hear it, but it adds a strangely human touch to her mechanical persistence. It captures Fallout's quiet fascination with machines that remember songs long after their creators are gone. Deep in the basement of the same lab lies a locked chamber marked as Experimental B. Inside, several vats contain crystallized polymers glowing faintly green. A terminal log refers to the material as self-sealing, an ironic joke by the developers, since the chamber door never opens without the player's intervention. It is one of countless small moments where environmental storytelling replaces exposition, letting design itself become a form of narrative. The area surrounding the Charles River contains one of Fallout 4's most subtle illusions. The reflections on the water occasionally flicker with faint outlines of moving shapes that do not correspond to any visible object in the environment. These are not glitches, but intentional effects placed by the artists to represent irradiated fish moving below the surface. Though impossible to interact with, they make the river feel alive, hinting that nature adapts even beneath toxic waters. Near Fort Hagen, a collapsed billboard displays an advertisement for Abraxo Cleaner, the fictional household product that appears throughout the Fallout series. If the player examines the image carefully, the smiling family resembles Vault Boy's stylized design, but the mother's face is intentionally identical to the Vault Girl mascot seen on perk posters. This blending of advertisements ties Fallout's in-universe corporations together, reinforcing the illusion of a connected economy before the war's destruction. The small house beside the bridge, leading into Sanctuary Hills, hides a nearly invisible detail. In one of the drawers is a receipt showing the purchase of a home automation package. This small note confirms that the Mr. Handy robot Codsworth was not originally standard equipment for all homes, meaning the player's family paid extra for luxury automation. This bit of lore deepens the tragedy of the game's opening sequence, showing how the comforts of pre-war life became the very chains that tethered society to its downfall. At the edge of the glowing sea stands an unmarked crater where the sand has melted into glass. Within it rests a single lunchbox and a child's skeleton. Inside the lunchbox is a silver fork and an apple core that never decays. The apple uses the same glowing texture as Nuka-Cola Quantum, suggesting contamination. The design was inspired by photos of real atomic test sites where sand fused into glass, reminding players that Fallout's world, however exaggerated, draws from the real scars of history. The Atom Cat's garage, known for its obsession with power armor, hides a piece of vintage culture that often goes unnoticed. If you wait there after midnight, one of the radios plays a faint echo of a pre-war DJ introducing an all-night rockabilly marathon. This broadcast is not part of the standard in-game radio stations and exists only in that area. It fades in and out as though caught between worlds, like a forgotten signal surviving across time. The old robotics disposal ground, northwest of Sanctuary, contains a small maintenance shack filled with disassembled Mr. Handy units. Among the debris is a holotape titled Order 7. When played, it contains nothing but static for several seconds before a single voice mutters, "They told us not to bury them." This line references a scrapped quest involving robots gaining sentience, but the tape was kept as a faint remnant of that abandoned storyline. Fallout's world is full of such half-finished ghosts, ideas left behind like echoes of creative experiments. Beneath the streets of Boston runs an enormous, largely empty subway network, but one specific station, near Park Street, plays a strange sound when you stand on the tracks. It is a high-pitched metallic whine that oscillates with the flickering lights. The developers confirmed that this sound was intentionally based on recordings of actual subway brakes, slowed to a crawl to evoke unease. The result is a tone that sits just on the edge of human hearing, adding a subconscious sense of tension without overt horror. Near the coast lies a small boat marked with the name Ranger 16. Inside is a locked safe containing a pair of handcuffs and a letter addressed to the Minutemen. The note references the patrol that never came back, connecting to radio chatter about missing scouts. While most players assume it is just flavor text, the same phrase appears in another note inside the castle, suggesting that the Minutemen had once maintained a naval patrol before the organization fell apart. It is one of many subtle details that show the slow erosion of order within the Commonwealth. South of the Boston Public Library is a derelict playground. The merry-go-round still spins if pushed, powered by hidden physics triggers. Beneath it lies a skeleton of a man in a business suit, clutching a briefcase filled with bottle caps. It is a grim parody of childhood innocence and economic obsession coexisting in the ashes of civilization. The juxtaposition between the laughter implied by the playground and the adult greed buried beneath it turns this small location into a microcosm of Fallout's central theme, the corruption of innocence by ambition. In the tunnels under the Mass Pike interchange, Graffiti depicting Vault Boy appears painted in red instead of his usual yellow and blue. These were intentionally drawn by the development team to resemble cave art, an experiment in imagining how future survivors might reinterpret old symbols. The red Vault Boy, grinning through layers of grime, becomes almost religious, a saint of survival worshipped by those who only half remember what he once meant. The glowing sea contains a crashed monorail car lodged in the side of a cliff. Inside, passengers remain seated as skeletons wearing tattered uniforms. The overhead speaker occasionally crackles with a pre-recorded announcement that repeats, "Please remain calm." The repetition slows each time the recording plays until it descends into distorted static. This subtle sound design makes the entire area feel haunted, as though the last moment of human composure still lingers, trying in vain to soothe the dead. On the outskirts of Concord, a rusted sign reads, "Welcome Home." Most players pass it at the beginning without noticing that the bottom half is covered in bullet holes, forming a smile. The effect was added intentionally to create a visual echo of Vault Boy's grin, suggesting that optimism itself has been weaponized by time and decay. It is small touches like this that make Fallout's world feel designed not just by its developers, but by the apocalypse itself. In Vault 81, the medical bay contains a poster showing a cheerful family under the words, "Healthy, happy, secure." If examined closely, the family members all have slightly different vault numbers stitched onto their jumpsuits, implying the image was a composite advertisement rather than a depiction of a real vault. This tiny inconsistency mirrors the deceptive nature of Vault-Tec marketing, promising unity and safety while hiding division and manipulation underneath. The Prydwen, the Brotherhood of Steel's massive airship, has a detail that few players notice. At dawn, the sunlight filters through its observation deck windows and refracts through the glass panels, creating the illusion of a halo around its central tower. This was not accidental, but a deliberate lighting choice, symbolizing the Brotherhood's self-perceived holiness. When seen from the ground, the ship seems angelic, but from above, the light fades, leaving only metal and shadow, a quiet metaphor for how faith looks different depending on where you stand. At Diamond City's marketplace, if you stand near the butcher stall long enough, the vendor occasionally hums the tune of the radio jingle, "Atom Bomb Baby." This was not listed in her dialogue lines, but embedded as ambient humming to make her feel alive during idle moments. Details like this make the city feel like a living ecosystem, one where people hold on to songs even when the radios go silent. In the Museum of Freedom, where the Minutemen storyline begins, a desk upstairs contains a small cracked snow globe. When picked up, it produces a faint jingle identical to the sound used for collectible snow globes in Fallout New Vegas. The inclusion was an intentional Easter egg, symbolically connecting the Commonwealth to the Mojave, hinting that even across vast distances, fragments of memory persist. Far to the north, in a forgotten cabin surrounded by snowdrifts, lies a skeleton sitting in front of a typewriter with a note that reads, "Still writing, even if no one reads." The page in the machine ends with the words, "The End." This unmarked location pays homage to the isolation of writers during the golden age of pulp science fiction, the same era that inspired Fallout's aesthetic. It is one of those perfectly quiet discoveries that feel deeply human, a whisper of creation surviving even when the world does not. And if you walk along the coastline during a heavy fog, you may occasionally hear the faint tolling of a distant bell. It comes from nowhere visible, and the sound never repeats in the same location twice. According to the audio team, the bell was recorded from an actual buoy in Boston Harbor and placed as an atmospheric element to represent lost ships drifting forever. It is haunting, simple, and beautiful, the sound of memory echoing across the wasteland. Near the outskirts of Quincy lies a collapsed overpass, its concrete split open like a wound. Beneath the debris is a skeleton holding a traffic cone and a clipboard, and beside it rests a cracked terminal with a single functioning line of code that simply reads, "Simulation incomplete." This odd fragment hints at an abandoned story thread involving pre-war traffic automation, where engineers attempted to create predictive software for vehicle congestion. The placement of the skeleton beneath the highway feels deliberate, a small tribute to the futility of controlling chaos in a world moments away from destruction. In the ruins of the Massachusetts State House, a broken globe sits on a desk, surrounded by stacks of yellowed newspapers. If the player activates it, it still spins and plays a faint music box tune, the same melody used in the Tranquility Lane simulation from Fallout 3. This was never listed in patch notes and seems like an intentional nod to the illusion of peaceful worlds hiding horror underneath. The globe itself becomes a quiet symbol, spinning endlessly as if trying to keep its tiny false paradise alive. Within the old Boston Bugle building, there is an elevator that never functions, yet if you wait beside it for exactly 2 minutes of real time, the doors emit a soft chime followed by muffled voices arguing about the headline of the century. The audio is sourced from unused recordings found in the game files, reintroduced here as ambience. It turns an otherwise empty floor into a ghostly newsroom frozen in time, its final debate trapped in echo. Far beneath the Corvega assembly plant is a maintenance tunnel that leads to a sealed vault door labeled Subsection 12. It cannot be opened, yet faint light seeps from its edges. If you press your ear close, you can hear mechanical whirring that matches the sound loop of Mr. Handy units. Some fans speculate that it hides a forgotten assembly line still operating in isolation, endlessly producing machines for a company that no longer exists. The developers never confirmed its purpose, allowing the mystery to remain part of Fallout's quiet beauty, an unanswered question humming beneath the ruins. In the wreckage of the USS Riptide along the river, you can find a pair of sunglasses sitting on the pilot's skeleton. When equipped, the game subtly adjusts the lighting around water, reducing glare more effectively than other eyewear. This minor feature is not listed in any item description and seems to exist purely for immersion. The idea that a relic of a drowned sailor would actually help you see more clearly near water feels poetic, as if the world itself remembers small kindnesses through design. If you stand inside Vault 111 during a storm, a faint rumble occasionally synchronizes with thunder outside. This effect was created by linking outdoor weather to indoor sound triggers, a rare technical detail that few players notice. It gives the illusion that the vault is not entirely sealed, that the world outside still breathes faintly through the cracks. It is a reminder that no matter how deep you hide, the wasteland always finds its way in. In Good Neighbor, behind the stage of the third rail, a crate labeled Costume 2 holds a pair of tattered wings and a handwritten note saying, "For the finale, if the power stays on." The wings were intended for a cut stage performance where Magnolia would have sung a song about freedom and decay. Though the sequence was removed, the note remains, a fragment of ambition left behind in the shadows of the club. The gesture feels heartbreakingly human art prepared for a night that never came. Deep within the Cambridge police station, there is a chalkboard listing missing patrols. If you revisit the board after advancing the Brotherhood of Steel storyline, one of the names quietly disappears without any quest update or dialogue. The game tracks whether certain soldiers survive battles even off-screen, and their absence shows up as erased chalk marks. It is a minor but chilling detail that reflects how Fallout often measures loss through silence rather than spectacle. In the vault under the Institute, if you explore the lower service tunnels, you can find an unmarked laboratory filled with floating synth parts in glass tanks. A nearby holotape contains distorted audio of children reciting multiplication tables. The sound is faint and unsettling, implying that these memory recordings were used to calibrate learning patterns in early synthetic brains. The fact that they echo through an abandoned lab adds eerie humanity to the machines that replaced their creators. There is a hidden connection between the railroad's headquarters and the Freedom Trail markers scattered across Boston. If you record the first letter of every inscription on the trail and rearrange them, they form the phrase, "Mankind Redefined," which is the Institute's motto. This dual symbolism shows that both factions, despite their opposition, are rooted in the same pre-war philosophical ideas about progress and humanity. It is an elegant narrative trick buried within the geography of the city itself. North of Bunker Hill stands a rusted diner filled with mannequin parts. On one of the walls is graffiti that reads, "The smiles don't fade." The mannequins here are arranged as if eating breakfast, one holding a spoon mid-air. A hidden environmental trigger occasionally causes one mannequin's head to tilt slightly when you turn your back. It happens so rarely that many players assume it is imagination. The developers later admitted it was intentional, a 1% chance event designed to create unease without confirmation. Fallout's horror often lies in suggestion, not in spectacle. If you stand near the wreckage of the crashed vertibird in the glowing sea at midnight, your Geiger counter clicks in rhythm, forming a slow pulse like a heartbeat. This occurs because the developers mapped radiation intensity to the same frequency used for background hums in that region. The result is an unintentional synchronization that sounds almost alive, like the planet itself breathing radiation. It is science turned into rhythm, death disguised as heartbeat. The small settlement of Oberlin Station hides one of the few purely visual secrets in the game. At dawn, if you stand on the roof and look toward Diamond City, you can see sunlight reflecting off the glass of the city's stadium dome for exactly 12 seconds before the angle shifts. The developers intentionally aligned this reflection to real astronomical timing for the Boston area, giving the illusion that even in fiction, the sun still moves by the laws of the real world. At the Robotics Pioneer Park, several models of Mr. Handy are frozen in mid-motion, holding paintbrushes. Each one paints a segment of a mural showing a pre-war family. If you watch them closely, one robot occasionally pauses and turns slightly toward the player before resuming its movement. The motion is not scripted, but triggered by random pathfinding recalculation, giving the impression that the robot briefly recognizes you. The tiny hesitation feels haunting, as if the line between programmed behavior and awareness has blurred. One of the most overlooked items in Fallout 4 is a small red book found in the wreckage of a school near Jamaica Plain. Its cover reads, "Tomorrow's Scientists." If you examine it in your inventory, it plays a faint audio clip of children laughing, an effect not tied to any other collectible. The sound fades quickly, but its existence suggests that it was meant as an interactive relic for a cut educational quest line. Few things in Fallout feel more melancholic than hearing echoes of joy from a world that can no longer create it. In the basement of the Museum of Witchcraft, where players encounter one of the game's most terrifying fights, there is a shelf of dusty journals. One of them contains a drawing of a creature resembling a Mirelurk queen, sketched in charcoal with notes labeling it the Mother from the Shore. The handwriting does not match any named character, suggesting that locals had their own mythology about wasteland beasts long before the player arrived. Fallout often hides folklore within survival, showing how fear becomes culture in the ruins. Far to the east of the map, beyond the wreckage of the Yangtze submarine, lies a tiny island with a half-buried statue. The face is worn smooth, but the pedestal reads, "Peace through progress." This phrase matches the slogan printed on Vault-Tec promotional posters seen throughout the Commonwealth. Its presence out here, isolated from any known facility, hints that Vault-Tec once planned expansion into offshore research. The statue's erosion shows how ambition always sinks, leaving ideals half buried in salt and sand. At night, if you travel the ruins near the Boston airport and listen closely, faint music sometimes plays under the wind. It is a reversed version of the Wanderer theme used in Fallout 3's trailer. The decision to reverse it symbolizes how the Brotherhood's expansion into the Commonwealth represents not new beginnings, but cycles repeating themselves. It is one of many ways Fallout uses sound to whisper meaning to those who listen carefully enough. And in perhaps the most mysterious corner of the game, beneath a sewer grate south of Diamond City, you can find a hidden chamber with glowing graffiti reading, "Do not forget us." The words pulse faintly every few seconds, powered by a single active fusion cell nearby. This cell never depletes, breaking normal game mechanics. No quest points to this place, and no lore explains it. It simply exists, a reminder of the forgotten, the nameless survivors whose stories were never told. Fallout's world is not built from grand battles or heroes alone, but from moments like this, quiet, haunting, and human, buried where only wanderers willing to slow down will ever see them. In the outskirts of Lexington lies an abandoned office complex called Wilson Atomatoys Corporate HQ. This location, filled with children's toys and broken machinery, contains one of the most haunting pieces of environmental storytelling in the game. On a wall in a locked manager's room, a framed picture of a cartoon bear is hung upside down. Beneath it, a terminal reveals that the company's final internal memo was titled "Laughter Never Ends." The memo describes a failed project to create a robot mascot that could entertain children endlessly. The upside-down bear serves as a silent response, a reflection of joy turned inside out. Fallout's world often uses small inversions like this thing's meant to bring happiness, transformed into eerie relics of obsession. In the same building's lower levels, players can find a factory floor with conveyor belts that still move despite the power being cut. This effect is achieved using static animation loops rather than actual electricity. The developers included it as a metaphor for how old-world industry keeps churning even when no one remains to profit. The belts move toys toward the void, echoing the way civilization built convenience until it consumed itself. Near the wreckage of the USS Constitution, one of the small rooftops hides a tattered flag showing 13 stars arranged in a circle rather than the modern pre-war pattern. This detail references early American Revolutionary flags, reinforcing the Constitution's role as a relic from a time when freedom was still idealized. The choice of 13 stars carries thematic weight, echoing rebellion, patriotism, and the endless cycle of history repeating itself. To the far north, near a place called Recon Bunker Theta, a small cave can be found hidden behind a frozen waterfall. Inside lies a makeshift camp with a fusion-powered lantern and a single journal written by an unnamed soldier. The entries describe someone questioning the Brotherhood's goals, fearing that technology has become their god. The final entry ends with the words, "If knowledge is sacred, then ignorance must be holy." The contradiction captures Fallout's moral complexity progress as both salvation and curse. The General Atomics Galleria, a ruined shopping center run by malfunctioning robots, includes one of the most clever technical jokes in the game. The mall's central clock shows the wrong time no matter when you visit, but if you destroy the nearby circuit breaker, the clock begins to work correctly for exactly 5 in-game hours before freezing again. This tiny behavior mirrors the idea of artificial life regaining sanity only to lose it again. The developers used subtle scripting rather than dialogue to convey the fragility of order among machines that mimic humanity. Inside Vault 81, if you linger in the residential quarters after curing Austin's illness, you can hear muffled laughter and faint applause echoing through the halls. This ambient track is unique and never repeats elsewhere. It was added to give the sense that life, though damaged, continues in small bursts of normalcy. Few players ever return to the vault after the quest, meaning that this fragile happiness remains largely unseen, an echo of joy preserved for no one. In the depths of the glowing sea, beyond the ruins of the Peabody House, lies a crater filled with glowing mushrooms that emit faint white light. Each cluster pulses rhythmically, synchronized with ambient wind volume. This creates the illusion that the environment itself breathes. According to one of the environmental artists, the idea was to make even the most irradiated places feel alive in their own strange way, showing that nature adapts faster than humanity. Diamond City's baseball museum holds a small plaque commemorating the last game. It lists a score between the teams Boston and New York, but the numbers form an impossible pattern. Both sides have identical runs every inning. This subtle error is intentional. The developers used it as a quiet joke, suggesting that the final pre-war game ended in perfect symmetry, a draw between rivals frozen forever in time. It's a poetic reflection of how humanity's conflicts never truly end, only pause. If you explore the financial district's rooftops, you can find a mannequin dressed in a business suit, holding a clipboard over the edge of a ledge. It appears ready to step off. Behind it lies a desk with a broken holotape labeled Quarterly Results. When played, it produces distorted laughter and static. The moment is bleak humor disguised as tragedy, a commentary on the pursuit of endless profit that defined Fallout's pre-war world. The figure seems to be caught mid-decision, frozen at the moment industry turned suicidal. The wreckage of the Yangtze submarine contains countless details that many players never see. One of the most poetic is in the captain's quarters, where a small bonsai tree sits beside his bunk. The leaves never move, but the shadow they cast sways slightly with the ship's motion. This was done using a trick of lighting rather than animation, symbolizing life persisting even in confinement. The captain's story, stuck under the waves for centuries, mirrors that tree, both preserved through discipline and devotion to something that no longer exists. Near the outskirts of Fort Strong, inside a small bunker, a terminal displays logs from soldiers testing prototype mini-nukes. One entry reads, "One direct hit vaporized everything except the flag." The bunker indeed contains a scorched American flag still clinging to the wall. It's not indestructible, but its resilience against earlier explosions gives the illusion that patriotism itself survived where people did not. Fallout's dark irony often hides in these visual metaphors, symbols enduring where morality fails. A quiet reference to the series' past can be found in the ruins of the Greater Mass Blood Clinic. One of the filing cabinets contains a patient record signed by Dr. H. Zimmer, a name first introduced in Fallout 3 as the Institute scientist who created synthetic humans. This tiny document confirms continuity between the games and hints that Zimmer's influence spread far beyond the capital wasteland. The subtlety of these breadcrumbs turns exploration into a kind of archaeological study of storytelling. In the Red Rocket Station near Sanctuary, a terminal mentions a shipment delay caused by an injured employee named Hank. The player later finds a skeleton beneath the building's workshop, wearing a Red Rocket uniform and clutching a wrench. Though never explicitly connected, the implication is clear. Hank's injury became permanent, and his final act was trying to fix the place one last time. Fallout rarely states tragedies outright. It lets you discover them gently through implication. The Cambridge crater, formed by a downed warhead, has a unique soundscape unlike any other part of the game. Faint whispers rise and fade with each gust of wind. Audio engineers achieved this by blending slowed-down recordings of Geiger counters with reversed human speech. The words are indecipherable, yet they create an eerie texture, suggesting that radiation itself murmurs memories of the people it destroyed. At the far edges of the Commonwealth, outside the playable boundary, lies a hill dotted with trees that sway even when no wind is present. This movement is caused by a looping animation meant to simulate atmospheric currents near the map's invisible walls. Some players call it the breathing forest. Though unreachable, it serves as a visual illusion of life continuing endlessly beyond what you can see, a fitting metaphor for the game's theme that the world, in all its chaos, never truly ends. Inside the Boston Mayoral Shelter, a pre-war survival bunker, you can find an intercom system still faintly powered. When activated, it emits a child's voice saying, "Dad, are we safe?" followed by static. This sound file is hidden in the game's assets under a folder labeled Memory. It is unclear whether it was part of a scrapped quest or simply added as texture, but its inclusion turns a generic bunker into something heartbreakingly human. The railroad's hideout beneath the Old North Church includes a back room with a single framed photograph of a man and woman in lab coats. The photo's texture file reveals that these are modeled after two of the real developers who worked on Fallout 4's art direction. The decision to immortalize themselves as forgotten scientists reflects how creative work and fictional worlds blur the artists becoming ghosts within their own ruins. There's a chilling environmental story inside the Milton General Hospital. In one of the operating rooms, a terminal lists a sequence of surgeries canceled due to power interruptions. The same terminal contains a personal log reading. We switch to manual, but the screams won't stop. The combination of clinical detachment and human horror turns an ordinary hospital into a site of moral decay, showing that the collapse of infrastructure often reveals the collapse of empathy. In a derelict home north of Concord, a single working record player sits beside a burnt couch. The record on it is labeled Echoes of the Future, an unused track that plays reversed piano notes for 15 seconds before looping. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the game and is not part of the standard soundtrack. The piece was composed by Inan Zur as an experimental ambient loop, symbolizing memory loss and decay. Its placement in a ruined home transforms it into an elegy for civilization itself. At the end of the world, Fallout does not rely on grand speeches or monuments to communicate meaning. It hides its truths in these fragile moments, objects arranged just so, sounds buried under silence, and whispers that play only when no one is supposed to be listening. The Commonwealth feels alive not because of quests or dialogue, but because of its attention to things too small to matter, yet too powerful to ignore. Each overlooked fragment is another heartbeat in a dead world, steady and slow, reminding you that even ruins can remember.